All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Feel free to continue to get up, grab extra pizza. There's plenty more. Get more sody pops, do whatever. This is really laid back. Today we have Jonah Gardner from ID. He's a junior. He'll be talking about classic techniques in the digital age here. And we really hope you enjoy. Afterwards, we have just a few announcements if you want to stick around. And then low-key helping other clubs out. Cab is doing the lone mic tonight downstairs, which is, to my understanding, like karaoke, potentially poetry reading, whatever else. There's CIM and CIA and case students going. So go bond with other students, have a good time. But let's give a round of applause and a warm welcome for Jonah. Thank you.
What's up, guys? Well, thanks for being here. I promise the talk is way less formal than the title indicates. But yeah, to kind of start off a bit about myself, I'm a third-year design student in industrial design, studying transportation, also taking classes in graphic and environmental design. I'm a member of IDSA, which is Industrial Design Society of America. Last summer, I spent my time teaching at the school and interning at a local motorcycle company. Did some design work for them. And this past semester, I spent time in an exchange program in France at the Strat School of Design. And what I'm going to talk about today has a lot to deal with kind of like the way I go about my work and why I sketch the way I do in the digital space, especially in design and any form of ideation across any of the creative fields. I think that it's important to develop multiple levels of sketching, and I think especially when we're students and we're learning, it's easy to kind of fumble around when we get into the digital space, especially because we're learning programs, we're learning different softwares. But I think a good way around that is kind of to look at how people draw and sketch in the past. So like I said, talking about the kind of the evolution of drawing, obviously people started with cave drawings and rocks, and then got into charcoal and some ink and then ballpoint. And now we're kind of transcending from the 2D kind of tablet and Cintiq digital age and starting to move more and more towards VR. This is all fun, but a lot of times the new drawing tools can actually, they can sometimes hurt us. Of course, they allow us to be more precise. So there's a lot more precision in design and in art and in everything today because we have digital things. We can do more manipulation with our images. But sometimes there's a breaking point. So I found one of my biggest struggles my sophomore year was when I sketched digitally, it would take me, maybe 12 hours to do like one of my first couple digital sketches. And that was just because, not necessarily I didn't know Photoshop, but just because I jumped straight into kind of over-refining things. So what can we do about this? First of all, I think it's important to plan ahead. When I start projects, I like to start with a fat gel pen or a Sharpie, basically something you can't control line weights with at all, and just accept the fact that there will be mistakes and there will be just errors in your ideation sketching. A lot of times as creatives, we want to make the prettiest image we possibly can, which is part of the job and it's an important part, but that's not what we should do right jumping into it. At least that's my belief. So I plan accordingly and increase my paper size and decrease my pencil tip size so that I have more precise lines as I progress throughout the project, and I have slightly bigger drawings as I go throughout the project. It allows you to be, creative in the upfront kind of ideation process, but also more precise and critical of your own work as you get towards the end. So the technique that I'll be demonstrating today and that I'll be speaking about today is what I refer to, and I think what is kind of commonly referred to as the Canson technique. Canson is a brand of paper. They sell grayscale paper. They've been doing it for years. This technique it's an ancient, figure drawing and painting technique. It's nothing fancy. But I think it can really help you it has helped me a lot when I do digital sketching that I want to do quickly. So the reason this is such a successful technique is two reasons. One, it saves time. You can use the background as a mid-value, but also the strength of implied lines in your work, I think is something people often forget about. Like I said, I had a tendency when I first started to really overdraw everything, and I'm a transportation designer, so I can get away with being a bit more artistic. I don't have to worry too much about if something can be made out of a mold or if it fits kind of a plan, some blueprint or whatever. So anyway, moving into that philosophy can be carried into whatever work it is you do. So for me, I come from a transportation background. This is a lot of the work that I reference. Some of it's from my friends, some of it's from fellow students, some of it's from professionals in the car world, but it's all the same technique. You can see here, this is one of my favorite designers. His name's Jan Jarsal. He works at Renault. Using the background as a mid value, but also like creating value with color on gray, and then like a hard indication of a reflection. I draw a lot of metal, obviously, but this can be applied to soft goods as well, and additionally it can be applied to anything on a product or in character and design, like character design and concept art. And this technique doesn't only apply to sketching, but it can also apply to how you produce your final renderings from a 3D world. And the reason that is because of the fact that this technique allows you to utilize the strength of implied lines. And what that does is that engages your viewer and allows them to see what they want to see in the image, and allows them to kind of fill in the information that needs to be filled in. And it's just a way to draw the viewer in. It's kind of to not show everything, but show just enough that the viewer's brain can understand what that figure or that object is doing. So yeah, that's kind of it for the keynote. And I'll give a quick demo. And while I'm doing the demo, if you guys have questions, feel free to just shout them out. If anyone has questions now, feel free to. No? All right. Cool. Well, let's see. Okay. So the first image I'll bring up is just an example that I've kind of completed beforehand. So again, this is obviously quite similar to the work that I reference. I spend a lot of time late sophomore year and summer like studying how transportation designers specifically make images and sketch, and what worked and what didn't, and what was efficient and what was not, and what I enjoyed to look at, So this sketch was just started out as little pen doodle, and then I scanned that in, overlaid it once in the digital space, and then began to paint in Photoshop. And I have the layer stack here that I can kind of deconstruct. So if we start, basically I started with the little doodle and then painted over that. Let's see if I can find my my actual sketch. But from there, I just began to build things. And for transportation, I always start with the wheels, just because they're like the legs of the vehicle. You know, for animals, it's similar thing, I imagine. And then I began to add detail and just trying to control how much I want the viewer to see and what I want the viewer to pay attention to. And allowing that Canson technique to kind of dominate the image and engage the viewer as much as possibly can. Then I began to add more detail. And then what really comes in handy isn't really the beginning, but the end of the image making is what makes it, you know, a hot image, a cool thing to look at, right? The beginning is really it's more technical, it's blocking in values, basic stuff, but I enjoy actually like finishing the image off with more kind of artistic license. So adding some lighting scenario, I always like to add a rim kind of light, an edge light at the far side of the whatever it is I'm drawing, whether it's a building, a car, or a human. That's just allows you to show what the backside of the object is doing. And that's like a technique that I saw Scott Robertson using a lot in his work. And then finally, to finish it off, a bit of a environment. And I painted the background value in over top this rear to kind of push that back in space, and really wanted the viewer to focus in on this corner. And then I put a little square in here and kind of erased it to give a sense of where the light's coming from on the right side. And then also painted like a kind of reflection on the bottom. So that's kind of how I build my Photoshop files. A lot of times, like when I started out, I had, you know, buddies that were ending up with Photoshop files that had 350 layers, 450 layers, 200 layers. I had one that was like 225 layers. It was one of my first ones. Now there's nothing wrong with that. If that's your jam, then by all means. And don't get me wrong, for a final rendering, like if I'm doing a final design sketch, I'll do whatever it takes to communicate the object as best as I possibly can. However, to sketch quickly in the digital space, I still use the same fundamental techniques, and then I just spend more or less time on the image depending on where I am in the process of the project. So to kind of demonstrate how I set this up and what Photoshop kind of cheats I used to do it, I'll just do a quick, like, I guess a sphere here, the classic sphere. So start off with whatever it may be, whatever object you're gonna draw or render. I'll just do an ellipse for now. And you can make it whatever color you want, but basically I always start with blocking in the value. So for a car sketch, I use like gel pen or ballpoint pen, so I always have basically the silhouette to work in, and I just paint in that silhouette and then use that as kind of a mask for the rest of my layers in Photoshop. So what I do after I have the first initial value blocked in is I start a new layer, and if you right click on that layer, if it will let me, you can go to create clipping mask, and what that does is any value that you draw on this layer will appear only in this circle. So for example, if I do this, it's only going to appear in this circle, but if I release this from the clipping mask, it's going to appear everywhere that I painted it. The cool part about this is you can give the illusion of it being a precise image when really the process of making that image wasn't exactly super precise. You're just using the computer to assist your precision, but it's not getting in the way too much because you can still work around it. So that's kind of the base for like every drawing I've ever done after I kind of discovered how to do this. In the storefront project and in any car project, and also some final products I did as well. Another technique, or Photoshop kind of hack or whatever layer style that I like to use, is called overlay layer. So what this allows you to do is to take any hue or value that you have, and you can paint white or black over top it, and it will appear as oops it'll appear as it won't appear as white, it'll appear as just a highlight. The same goes for if you switch to black, right? So basically I'm letting the computer do the color theory. I'm not doing anything but painting black and white. And I think it's important to learn color theory, obviously, but allowing, you know, the computer to do this helps me to focus more on what I want the image to be doing and the proportions in the image, and kind of the artistic license that I want to take with it. Taking that same philosophy and applying it to kind of the Canson technique, you can take whatever value you want, drop it in this, and then you have the background as a mid-tone, and that begins to use, you know, implied lines to help engage the viewer. And then from there, like, once I have a base form in, I would go in and get kind of, you know, as sketchy as I wanted with it, and I would probably do some crazy like edge light as well. But yeah, so you can get as artistic as you want with it. You can also keep it precise and really geeky. But yeah, and then taking that technique and applying it to every image I make is kind of a result of this. And the nice part about this technique is you can use it in multiple different ways. Just because you use one technique doesn't mean that the image is going to look the same every time. I sketch a lot with gray, color on gray, but I also sketch a lot color on color. And where this gets fun is using things like saturated colors. You can get really fun images. Now this is quite a car thing to do, is like a color on color sketch. You don't see too often. Obviously if you're rendering or sketching metal, that makes it a bit easier. For skin tone though, it works just as well. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, give me a shout. What's up?
Can you go back to that view?
Yeah.
I want to know how you switch back and forth from black and white highlight.
Yeah. Like while painting, you mean?
While painting, yeah.
So there's a couple of keyboard shortcuts that I use when I'm doing this technique with just black and white, and I have it on this overlay layer feature. If you just hit D in Photoshop, no matter what your values were, you know, it'll always bring it back to black and white if you hit D. And then X will obviously flip them back and forth. So, X will flip them back and forth. Yeah, and then you kind of just keep painting from there, and you can, you know, switch back and forth on one layer. You can get more and more kind of technical with it. You can go full Scott Robertson and like calculate all the perspectives and lighting and like how things would reflect, or you can just kind of like fudge it in there. But yeah.
You mess around with in terms of environment and lighting changing the lighting for like a more dramatic scene where it's like warm and cool at the same time.
Right.
On the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. If especially if the image is gray value,
Yeah.
and that's something you can do that's very subtle but helps a lot. For example, let's see if I have. So I'll go back to, maybe this will help just when I'm speaking. So for example, with an image like this is quite literally warm and cool. I basically use all the same techniques I'm showing you with clipping masks and overlay layers. So I painted black and white, and then I adjusted the background after this to make it like this taupe kind of like desaturated brown almost. And then on the final layer, I painted the blue on top to give like an illusion of sky reflecting onto the vehicle. And then cast shadows and part breaks and detail after that. Another thing is in regards to like pushing and pulling. The more you do it, the better you'll get at like knowing how to show what you want to show, and how to kind of let the viewer fill in the information that is maybe less necessary. So with this image here, like in the headrest of this seat, I basically didn't draw. I wonder if I can zoom in here. Yeah, I basically didn't draw like the headrest at all. I had obviously a ballpoint sketch under here that I was going off of, and you can see that underneath. But all I did was draw the outside like silhouette of it, just to give the slightest edge to kind of complete the visual envelope of where that form would sit in space. But here is the same value as here. And then I just created, like, I wanted it to feel very round, so I just created a really hot spot on here and let that diffuse either way. So this is green, a little bit of like really dark green up top, and then here it is a little bit here, white on the highlight, and then nothing underneath that. But that light line here completes the visual form so that the viewer will understand it without actually you drawing it. And one other benefit of this technique is that you can kind of change the color as you go. So if I were to take this sketch and, if I were to desaturate it, I can take this, I already have this blocked in. I can take this and I can go up here, create a clipping mask, and I can start to, kind of, I can block in my values very basically. And then from there, I can just keep focusing on the blocking in of those values. And I can even start another layer that would be like darks. But the beauty of this is, even though I'm roughly like blocking this in, all I'm doing is painting black and white. And because it's on an overlay layer, that means I can change the color post-production if I wanted to. Or even like while I'm still doing the image. So it could be purple. It could be any color you want. It could be green, whatever it may be. And, an image like this, I would tend to do, like, if I do gray, I like to use color. I don't really like to do gray on gray. I prefer to use color onto gray or color within color. It's the same color it is, like color within itself. But the fun part about this is it can be, literally any color you want it. What color do you guys like to? Let's pick one. Jolly Rancher green. Let's go for it. All right, I feel it. Feel it?
Heavily said coloring.
Gold could be good too. We'll go with Jolly Rancher green though. So with this, with a gray on color sketch, like I said, the beginning of the image making is really, it's not super sexy. It's pretty boring. It's color blocking, and the image isn't really engaging until, at least the way I do it, until the post production. So if I were to walk you through that process really quickly, the next thing I would do is use like a nice black, like a flat brush with, no transfer. And transfer, by the way, just, I don't know how well you guys know Photoshop, but when you're setting up your brushes, they have all the presets here. I mess around with transfer and I check and uncheck it all the time. What transfer does is, if you don't have transfer on, the line will look like this. It's going to be 100% consistent all across the board, much like a gel pen or ink would be. So you're going to get one opacity the whole time. If you check transfer, that's going to allow you as the artist to take over control of, what opacity that you're going to get thick to thin in your lines. The reason I say this is because when I'm color blocking, I want to have transfer off so that I get 100% of that value. When I'm sketching and drawing lines or creating value with like a soft brush, I want to have transfer on so that I can get taper in my lines and in my values. So with that being said, that will kind of that'll lead into the next part of the process, which would be just to continue blocking in your color, and then like if I wanted to go in and do like my block in my wheels, I can do that. I'll just do it really quickly here, but I guess there's karaoke going on downstairs. Yeah. And, what's up?
Is there a reason why you inverted the sketch, or did you sketch it in white?
I did not sketch it in white. The reason I inverted the sketch originally was because it was on red. When you have a hue, if you're working with a color, especially if it's a vibrant, like a red or green, a blue, using black lines on that value, it can get muddy quickly. And I think that white, especially when you're using like a darker gray background, allows for a bit more, it feels to me like it communicates a bit better, like with my lines. So if I were to take the sketch over top this, and I can re-invert it just to show you what I'm talking about, and put it on a multiply layer. It's a little more literal than I feel that something like that would be, because the value is so bright. But yeah, if I'm sketching on gray, like I'll usually keep my lines black, but after about 50% darkness on that grayscale meter, I'll switch them to white. And I think the reason that is just because contrast. Yeah, easier to read, easier readability, and makes more sense for the audience that you're, showing your images. So with that being said, once I have my wheels blocked in, and I have everything kind of shaded as I wanted, I would start to do things that would be kind of more on the artistic, like post-production side of things. So I'll just go back to I have this sort of half completed, so I can go back to it. So I'll go back to the red on red. So at this point in the process of this sketch, all I've really done is the technique that I showed you. This is maybe 6 layers of Photoshop. One layer being the background, another layer I lasso tooled out with the polygonal lasso, just like that. I lassoed out the silhouette and paint dropped the same value that's on my background into my selection, and then used that as my mask. And if you guys remember, the mask just allows you to paint within that area that you've already painted on. Beyond that, it's a layer of highlights. It's a layer of highlights and a layer of shadows. And really, there's basically no shadows in this image except for underneath the vehicle. And the kind of form changes come from just using this mid-tone with the highlight. I've also, another layer would be the wheels and the headlamps, and then the glass. And to do a reflection on the glass would be, I'm gonna group these. To do like a reflection on the glass, I would take white and then paint with a hard brush at 100% opacity, whatever the reflection may be, right? And then if you change that to overlay, that's gonna appear more like it's actually on the surface as opposed to like a graphic whiteness. And then all right, sorry about that. And then you can erase away to kind of give it a more realistic feeling. And actually, according to this light source, it would be the inverse of what I have drawn. So the highlight would occur here. But it's still the same technique. It's just an overlay layer that I have within a selection clipped to that painted part. And I would just continue developing this and continuing to kind of build the Photoshop file with more lights and darks and more detail. And then eventually you get to something like this. Now, maybe it might be best if I can, I'm not sure how this would look, so bear with me, but I actually have background painted on here. But if we were to take, let's see, I'll do this. So if we were to take that same image and then desaturate it and colorize it to make it be whatever, red. The colors are a little off. Like it wouldn't ever really be this bright, this white almost. But like I said with that, oh god, there's your Skittles green right there. But you know, you can do the color in post because of the technique that you used. And yeah, that allows kind of for more change of mind. And that's the reason I do that is because this style is the style that I use when I'm like in between my final design, my final direction, and my ideation process. So that way, if I'm feeling like sketching blue, I can sketch blue. But if I'm feeling like sketching, you know, whatever, yellow, I can do the same thing. So, and the values will still read across the board because of the way you set it up. Yeah, I mean, I could keep going and I could keep sketching, but that's basically the kind of the basics of the technique. And beyond that, it's artistic license. Do you guys have any other questions? Any, Juan? No? What's up, dude?
You mentioned
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that and where that's
Yeah.
going in the industry?
Definitely. So the reason I think I think virtual reality is kind of the next step in the world of creatives in terms of like how image making will evolve, because how many of you, if you raise your hand if you've ever worn a set of VR goggles, period. All right, so maybe half the room, right? Now, has anyone messed around with Tilt Brush or any virtual reality drawing software? No one? Cool. Well, you should, and I think it sounds like the game design studios actually have HTC Vive, which is what that is on. Tilt Brush is effectively it's what currently represents the best drawing software in a VR space. I don't think anything will ever replace paper and pen in terms of like what I enjoy working on. But like I said, you know, with the evolution of image making, VR is going to become a huge thing, especially in character design, and in vehicle design. Anything that you're creating an object that's bigger than human scale, but small enough that could be, you know, sculpted by hand. I think it's going to really evolve those industries because it transcends 2D, but it isn't. It's virtual, so it's not literally sculpting. But when you're using Tilt Brush, it's basically like you're painting ribbons that float in air, and they stick in the air. When I was at Strata, I had a kind of quick experience with Tilt Brush. And it was crazy. It was really cool, especially as a transportation designer. When you're doing interiors, to literally be able to sit in the space and draw like what you imagine, it's like a whole new world. But the cool part about that is I think is that's just going to be another enhancement to our creative world and how we take things from, you know, a little napkin sketch to something tangible and 3D printed or potentially fully prototyped or even in the market. And that's I think now what's an HTC Vive I think you get for $800 now. So they're getting to the level of affordability where they're almost like in all the professional studios they have them, at least as a car design studio. Architecture I'm not sure, but yeah, it's a really cool space. With that being said, it's still very unrefined, and you cannot get like really clean surfaces out of Tilt Brush, but it's freaking cool. Yeah. Let's see. That pretty much covers everything I have to talk about, at least on the top of my head. What's up?
I was just wondering if you had any like resources or artists or anything that you would recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. If you'd like, I can send you this PDF, and maybe you guys can throw it out to the email list. I've listed most of the artists and designers whose work this is. I'm a transportation designer, but that doesn't mean that that's all I care about. Even though sometimes it might seem that way, if you're in the studio. But you know, I look at everything and anything, and I grab inspiration from a lot of it's from sci-fi and kind of overly detailed things, like unnecessarily detailed things. But that's because I think that allows me to see potential in there rather than a minimalist product, which would be like more like a sculpture or a work of art. So in terms of like fellow transportation work, most of the stuff I reference is French. um, but in terms of inspiration and what I really like pick from, isn't necessarily like other people's sketches, but it's actually forms that exist in the material world, existing products, actually a lot of architecture that doesn't exist, like a 3D modeled architecture that's like impossible to make yet. But this guy, so if you guys, I'm sure everyone knows, or most people have heard of Scott Robertson. He's kind of the king of all concept art right now, and for the last 5 to 10 years. He gives fantastic demos. I would recommend, if you like him, also look at Arthur Martins. Arthur Martins is a transportation designer. He's the lead designer at Faraday Future, and they're doing some pretty cool stuff right now. He has a site called Deadbrush. If you look up Deadbrush, things like this will come up. He is really, really good at making very refined images. If you want to look at more sketchy stuff, stuff that's like more of the space that I enjoy, which isn't necessarily the final renderings, but more like painterly, I would look up Sidney Hardy. Sidney Hardy works at GM in California. He went to Stratz School of Design. He's worked for companies like Peugeot and others. And this is his like helmet sketch down here. But he sketches a lot of vehicles and apparel. And his Instagram is dope. And he does a lot of VR sketching too. So look him up on Instagram. Sidney Hardy right here. He's awesome. And then Felix Godard as well. Felix Godard is he's an interior designer at Tesla, but on the side he does concept art, and I think he's drawing or illustrating like his own comic book right now. He has like a series. He has a website online. If you type in Felix Godard, it'll be like one of the first 3 links. But he's released a series of images over the last couple of years with the title Pushkatel. No idea what it means, but I want to buy it, whatever it is. And he does stuff like this, really detailed sci-fi forms, and really, really cool work. Let's see if there's anything else. Oh yeah, and if you're a character designer, so John, what was this guy's name? Yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce it, but
Yeah, Vitaly Bulgarov. I don't know. I'll find him and send it out at an email or something. But if you like, if you're a product designer or environmental designer, and you like kind of furniture but more minimalist stuff, and maybe mechs or sci-fi doesn't really translate to your world, look up 12 Monthly. They're a group of 2 product designers, and they redesign old products, or they come up with new ones themselves, and they do 1 a month, which is hence the name 12 Monthly. It's just 2 guys. They have a really good sense of taste, and I put this image up here because I think this represents the kind of the Kansan method, like what it does in terms of mathematically engaging your viewer's brain, by not showing like everything, but it's in a final render, exported from Keyshot, so it can transcend to all your image making, not just your sketching. Yeah. Anyone else? No? Cool.
Could you talk a little bit about sort of like the limitations as well as the freedoms that come along with like design transportation?
The limitations within the field, or like the sketch, or what?
Yeah, definitely in the field. Like,
Yeah.
do you like kind of face a lot of like really big obstacles as far as material and designing, and like what do you have to think about typically?
Yeah, as a student, we have a lot of freedom. I think for all of us, especially if you're in the product, if you're in the material design world, So if you're not designing something that's going to stay in a digital space but will have to be produced for the mass market or engineered to hold people inside of it, like a building, as a student, we're ignorance is bliss. We make a lot of mistakes that we don't know about, but also knowing the fact that we're students and kind of utilizing that. So, like this project here, like no one would ever fit in that, right? No one would ever fit in there. And actually the concept behind it was that there was, I did this with a fellow student of mine at Strat, and he did the interior, and the concept was based off of like flotation therapy and sensory deprivation, and it's for like a future world where everyone lives in a hyper urbanized society and everyone's interacting with the digital space to a crazy degree, and the concept being that this vehicle picks you up, takes you away to like a nature reserve, but while you're on the way to the nature reserve, you're like laying down in the vehicle and interacting with a virtual space up top, like on the roof, and then the roof comes off when you get to the end destination. If I were to present that in a design studio as a professional, it would be laughed at as a doodle. Now, it's fun to do. In a portfolio, it doesn't really hold up that well. But as a conceptual statement of where mobility could take us, it has value. But the workarounds that I have to do as a transportation designer and everyone in our field have a lot to do with packaging around human scale and making sure everything's within reach, but not gonna hurt you if you crash. So limitations being the human being, like working around a person. And in terms of the field, it's very competitive. So you kind of have to be all or nothing, which is why I say that, if you're in the design studio, you'll notice like the transportation students, it appears they don't care about anything else, even their own health. But that's because it's very competitive, and once you get your foot in the door, that's a different story. There's a lot, but I would say biggest obstacles, human. The fact someone has to sit in it and not get crushed. Does anyone have any more off the top? Who's a freshman in here? Oh, wow. Oh, that's surprising. Nice. I recognize you. You're going to design, yes or no? Maybe? Solid, man. Well, I'll see you in there. Where's everyone else going? Just go, start with you.
Illustration.
Okay. Solid. Cool. Cool. Nice. Cool. Well, it's good to see some variety in here. It's awesome. Like I said, I think the technique can apply to anything. Obviously, the rendering style I do is based off of hard materials. Although for the interior, we do work with fabric a lot, and leathers and kind of new techie materials. But for exteriors, it's all metal and glass and aluminum and clear-coated paint. So it's all hard reflections. But the technique at its core is it's just a classic figure drawing technique. So it can be used for anything. Cool? All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Well, Jonah, thank you
No
for
problem.
coming. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Don't forget that right now, down in the atrium, there is the lone mic happening. So if you are interested, go check that out. Second floor.